Welcome to Back on the Broomstick,
a modern witch's spoken word grimoire,
where two witchy friends from way back are reconnecting to their pagan roots after a long period of mundanity.
We're rewalking the path of the wise and trying out all the latest spells, rituals, and magical theory in today's witchcraft and pagan practices.
So grab your wand and your incense,
your cauldron and your crystals,
and join us
as we get
Back on the Broomstick.
Welcome to Back on the Broomstick. I'm Laylla.
And I'm Chelle.
And today we'll be talking about all things runes, and we are lucky enough to have a guest with us today, Wayne Brekke, who is a practicing rune reader. I'm getting weaver. It is a practicing rune reader, author, and clinician living in Omaha, Nebraska currently. He is the host of the Rune Ways podcast and YouTube channel. And as an experienced rune weaver, Wayne seeks to help others through rune readings and spiritual consultation. And he's here today to talk with us about runes and his current book, The Complete Guide to Runes, an essential reference for rune lore, meanings, divination, and magic. So welcome, Wayne, and thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you for having me. Yes.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, Wayne, and how you got into runes.
Oh, okay. Again, Wayne Brekke is the name. And
my
I started, nobody can, it's hard. But it's interesting because the last name kind of came into play when I started, like late after I started runes in a weird way. But I started reading runes about 6 years ago, maybe more. I've been into runes and Norse mythology and everything since high school. So since like 82, 83, taking classes in my high school about Norse mythology, which I thought was very strange. They had medieval history, they had Greek history, and they had Norse mythology. And I took them all.
That's cool, though.
Those sound like great classes.
It was inspiring. Yeah. It was very inspiring, and I really enjoyed it. And so I kept that throughout my life. Of course, I got into Dungeons and Dragons in high school back then, and really took to, like, I was an artist, so I like to draw. So I really took to things like the Tolkien runes. And I was fascinated with the Elven language, and I really liked all that. So through high school, doing all that, and I was raised, actually at 15, I became a Buddhist. So I was Buddhist still. I mean, it's a philosophy. So I incorporate that into my spiritual work. But yeah, I had that going on. And so I was very accustomed to different cultures, and I really, I was digging into it. Then I went in the military as a firefighter in Alaska for 5 years. And up there, I still maintained my interest in everything. Really, all through that, I didn't really practice rune reading or anything just until about, like I said, about 6 years ago. And it was because of everything that I'd been in, not only that and fantasy gaming and all, but I was still really very interested in the Norse mythology. And I had realized that my great grandfather came to America from Norway, and that there's a town called Brekke by the Sonenfjord. And I was like, wait, what? Okay, this is strange. So a lot of things started leading up to this journey into runes. And I went into the Next Millennium bookstore, this bookstore we have right up the street. And I've been in there before several times. And for some reason, this time was the right time. I ended up getting a rune book. I saw runes. I thought, that looks like Tolkien runes. What are these? And it was the runes by Lisa Peschel, Peschel. I opened that up and I started reading this book and going through it. And for some reason, felt like I was struck by lightning. I kind of got a really good already idea of what they were about. I was fascinated by it, and I had this weird calling for the first time, really, because, kind of a jack of all trades. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life, but I had this weird calling to kind of help people. And I went up and they had rune sets, and I bought a rune set. And now I had a book and I had a rune set, and that was it. I just got so into it that I was all in. So much so that after a few months, I had another person that owns another metaphysical bookstore in rocks and crystals, and she is also a psychic medium. And she kept pushing me. She's like, "You should teach classes." I'm like, I'm not going to teach classes. I haven't done this long enough. And she's like, "No, you're ready. You should teach classes on this. That's going to help you read for other people." And I was like, wait. Reading for other people was also not really on my playbook. And then it all just kind of worked out. And from then on, I was actually hooked up with the Next Millennium bookstore. I always wanted to be on the other side of the table every time I went there to get readings, because they have readers every day. And then I found myself on the other side of the table. So that was really gratifying. And starting to read runes for people, and it just really worked. The classes were great, and I started reading, and I was just blown away with how accurate the things were and with the lessons I was personally learning from reading for other people. And then I started working there just because I
Mhm.
wanted to start helping people in the store. So I didn't know how much I got paid or when I got paid. I just showed up. I
You're
just
just
did.
like, I love it here.
I have a quick question, Wayne. You said that
Yeah,
you bought your first rune set.
sure.
I am more familiar with tarot as a divinator,
Oh yeah.
and there's this, superstition, I guess is the best word to call it, that says you should not buy your first tarot deck. It should be gifted to you. Is there any weird superstition?
Before I go too far, that's complete bunk, by the way. You don't have to be. It's just
No, no,
it's
no.
just one of those pervasive
No, it's
rumors.
not true. It's not true at all. But is there any sort of like weird superstition, true or false, and as far as obtaining your first rune
Mhm.
set?
Well, that is out there, and that is something that I try and teach people through my podcast and consultation about what rune weaving is, and it is weaving other everything into your spiritual practice, with runes being the forefront. Um, no, I don't. I I make runes and I sell them, so I hope people want to buy them. And the thing is that purchased runes, I think, are just fine to have as a first rune set. To me, if you want to stick with that tradition, then you should be the one going out and gifting tarot decks and rune sets to people if that's the way you feel. I totally am behind that. But I also feel like I was called to this set and there was nobody stopping me from picking it up. I wasn't going to go. I didn't know anybody. In fact, to this day, I didn't know anybody that did runes. I know now maybe two, three other people. I've been in it more over the years, but I don't know many other rune readers. Nobody else in town that does it as often as I do, and I don't know anybody that's had a rune reading. 90% of my 90% of my clientele have never had a rune reading before,
Really?
and they still get one from me. And so I'm like, when it comes down to those kinds of things, people say that you're supposed to make your own, you're supposed to carve them, and you're supposed to do them out of a certain type of wood, and then you're supposed to, some people say you should bloody them, otherwise if you purchase them they're worth nothing. And I don't want to live in their world. I live in my own reality, which dictates I buy what I want and I intune those things. And that's why I say in my book, runes are just tools. Runes are tools. You're the magic. Runes are only pieces of wood, plastic, whatever you make them out of. And what makes them magical is the intention that you, as a rune reader, puts into them each and every time you pull them out of the bag. Because they're that versatile, I write runes on my hands. I carry runes with me. I make bindrunes. So to me, that kind of weird sacred thing, tradition, or belief that people say they're not of any use is just showing that you're not that good with them. Then, if that's the case.
You're speaking directly to my nerdy, witchy heart here
Oh
because
yeah.
I too found runes very, very similarly back in the 80s, playing Dungeons and Dragons, reading Tolkien. And I didn't know about witchcraft. It was not as prevalent then as it is today. I knew about Norse mythology, Greek mythology, Celtic mythology, and those types of things called to me, similar to the way runes kind of felt good to you. Then as I got older and discovered witchcraft and went into runes, I originally used it as a written
Yep.
language. To me, it was more something to write spells in, to keep it kind of secret, or to use it intentionally, because as you talked about bind runes and sigils, the act of writing or creating one, the whole process of paying attention to creating that is part of the magic and setting the intention. And so that's really where I got wrapped up into runes rather than divination, like you said. Runes are a language, but they're also a divination tool. So can you speak to that a little bit, like what the history of it is and how people can use it as a divination tool?
Yes, runes initially were they were an alphabet. They still are. Younger Futhark, the Elder Futhark, and by Futhark I mean it's like an anagram of the first letters of the alphabet of either the younger or the elder. And then there's multiple sets of runes, and they have been around for just thousands of years. People tend to consider runes as a Norse or Nordic or Scandinavian, German, Danish kind of thing, but in fact, they had traveled all around the world for millennia before they even settled there and were used. So they were used in many different connotations. I'm sure they were changed. And then what happens is you can take that alphabet And what people have done is that each letter, you might say, or each sigil has an association. So the association is what brings in all that intention. And to me, the association is what brings in, ties together the gods, the mythology, and whatnot. And the reason why you can use them as a divination tool is that when they, being able to read them, it's not just what that symbol is and the meaning, the general meaning of the symbol. It's how they relate to the other runes that are beside them. And also taking into mythology, if something is an Odin rune, like Anzus, I mean, rune of communication of all forms, and if that is a rune related to Odin and it's about communication, well, then you have like Hugin Munin, you have, well, then you can start to think about, well, what is it telling me about knowledge, wisdom, listening, book smarts versus street smarts? When do I need to learn more? When do I need to pay attention? When do I need to help and listen even more? So each rune has a connotation like that. It has a relationship to a god, to a certain thing, whether it is a rune of healing, protection, because multiple runes are protective. But you can tell the story in each rune. Thurisaz, Thor's hammer, the thorn. I mean, when that comes up, think about what Thor is. I mean, Thor is very gregarious, but he'll be the one that will stand up to the giants. And it's not a war god. He was never a war god, but he was the one that will plow your fields, will drink with you in the tavern, and then will go and defend your village. So it's a rune of defense. And when you start weaving in the mythologies of that and trying to think, it opens up what the runes truly mean. And a lot of people have their own versions of what each rune, and you should have it'll open up for you as you go, and you'll start to put in your own meanings. I've had people sit down in front of me, and I've been doing runes for a while, and all of a sudden something comes up, and I was like, wait, that just changes the meaning of this rune in a mind-blowing way. And then I keep it. So it also evolves as you go. You can write things with it. That's why, like you said, use it to write spells with, which I do as well. And it's just that versatile. So when you take that down and you put intention into saying, all right, I mean, that's why people can read bones, right?
Yes.
Each object or artifact has you put an association with it. So you can cast runes and put associations with them. And as you pull them down and you read them like a story, you get your divination if you ask for the connection. And my divination, I usually say I don't consider myself a psychic medium because I don't want to see your grandma behind you. I just like for you to let your people come in and my people talk to your people. And that's when we get our consultation.
I love that. And there's definitely, like you said, the runes themselves may not necessarily be, it's just a tool. The intuition, the energy really comes from you. I like how you said that when you do a divination with the runes, it might have something new for you. Like it might lay a certain way or in correspondence with a different rune, or just the energy that you're reading that time could be different each time. And you have to be kind of open to that and able to be a little bit flexible, I think, sometimes with that.
Especially when explaining it.
I think the correlation between runes and tarot, that I think that's where it's making sense to me, because I only ever used runes more as like sigil work, but I can see such similarities with tarot that I definitely am getting it.
And don't you think that if you allow yourself to be open to the person's energy and to the person's people that are there, that sometimes depending on their situation and what they're talking to you about, that those tarot cards, it'll expand. They're just not static. Right. This means A, this means B, no matter what. That's the beauty of any divination method, I believe, too. But, for example, I was one rune that changed. I remember when it happened, it was at a Mystic Fest that we had. And the Gifu, it's just an X. It looks like an X, the gift rune. And I always thought, well, that's a good rune. You bring that up. Wow, you can't reverse this rune. So it's like, it must be a very good rune. You're going to get something, or maybe you've been gifted something, or maybe you are, it's about giving and receiving. So learning how to accept and receive. And then my wife said something to me that kind of opened it up. She says, having issues with possibly, with self-esteem. And like, she's like, sometimes when people just like even give me a compliment, like for a second, I just go, you kind of blow them off and I think they're lying, and you just kind of blow it off. And that hurt my feelings for a while. I was like, oh no, that's sad. But a lot of people have that. I felt the same way. I was like, wait a minute, I do that too. It's uncomfortable sometimes when somebody gives you a compliment. So if that's uncomfortable, what about what's happening with everything else in your life that has to do about you receiving. Sometimes we give, but it's that receiving. You can't even take a compliment without you just brushing it off yourself. You did it. You brushed it right off because you didn't feel you were worthy enough. And so after that, I started telling people more about that when Gifu comes up. Maybe look into this. Are you allowing yourself to just accept other people's generosity and other people's love and other people's compliments, no matter what you think they mean?
I love that there's never an end to how they kind of tell a story and how that opens up, whether it be for different people you're reading or for you. It's just kind of the more you use it, the more you're still delving.
Yep. Beautiful thing is too, is you like, when we talk about the versatility of runes, there's so many different ways to use them if you're not busy reading for people. So
I did love in your book how after each one of the runes, you did have different correspondences for them. And kind of like Chelle said, it very much opened my mind to them, to look at them in a different way. And I tend to use them as just as a language or as sigils. They, like you said, they mean certain things. Othala is one of my favorites. It's the ancestors, the hearth and home, that whole feeling of belonging and being there. I like that rune. So that's something that I'll use as, like you mentioned, as a sigil. Now you mentioned the word bindrunes. Is that different than a sigil, or is that the same as?
Well, I think you can incorporate bindrunes into sigils. So a sigil can also be decorative, and a sigil can incorporate other symbology as well. To me, it could have protective symbols and a bindrune. It could also have elemental symbols. It could have other personal symbols that you put with it. To me, that's more of a maybe. Yeah. I think it just incorporates them, and people have different views about that. Bindrunes are actually just a combination of runes. You can take up to 3-4 runes. You can write your name out in, but I usually like to take about start with a good 3 runes. What am I doing? And they ask me to do these for people as well. They'll ask me, and I'll say, okay, well, what are you doing? And they're like, well, I'm going on a trip. We never have a good time on a trip. I really want this to be better. Can you make something for everybody in the going on this trip? So I'd make a bind rune. I'd bless them, consecrate them, and there's a way to do that. But it would be a thing with you start with the Reidho, the travel rune, and then maybe you want to add in some happiness. Oh, so Perthro, so I would make sure Perthro is in there, which really is a nice, easy way to put that in there with Reidho, because it's already in here in that rune. And now you start to see other runes that come out of that rune, those intentions, and say, well, also I want them to have a safe journey. So I will put Othala in there. So, and now you have a bind rune that has it all, but you'll be able to see multiple runes. There'll be, Zeus would be in that. So communication naturally will come from that, which will bring them joy and a happier trip. And Tiwaz is in that naturally too. He's the god of strategy, because he's a war god. But to me, it's all about strategy, making a proper plan for victory. And so there's so many creative ways that you can create bind runes for yourself and for others.
Oh, so what it sounds to me, so I can explain it just a little bit for our listeners, it's very similar to some of the ways to create sigils, in which case you say you're taking 3 runes that you have chosen ahead of time that you feel applies to, whatever it is the working is. And so you'll start by writing the one rune, and then you'll look at that rune and see how the next rune that you have chosen, you can draw it with an adjacent or on top of that other rune.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And then continue to add the third rune. And as you're doing this, just like when you draw a sigil through letters or symbols and you're adding them together, you're using your intuition and your own magical energy to see the other runes inside of that and where they might fit energetically and aesthetically to make a bind rune. Is that correct?
Yep,
Awesome.
that's it.
I love
That's
that.
it.
I'm very much, I like sigils. I like chaos magic. I love symbols and symbology. So that's something that speaks to me very, very strongly. So hopefully that's something that our listeners can use as well.
And you mentioned chaos magic, which I like to point out that, well, in the Norse tradition and in that a lot of times from what I've learned is that they didn't really view good and evil. They viewed order and chaos. Yes. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Is a lion evil for eating an elk or killing that elk? Is a human evil for eating that elk? As well. Are we? So it's all taken into that. So I like to. Usually there isn't any and people have asked me that too. Well, what if I'm Christian? Can I still use it? Well, like almost
For
all of Norway is
language.
Christian. I mean, that's
Right.
the big Christianization that happened. Yeah, yes, you can. Again, it has nothing to do with any it's not like you're worshiping anything else. So I always tell Christians that I would leave out certain verbiage if
Mm.
they were kind of like, if they were all about Christianity, if they were about that, I would leave out any connotation of you should do this because Odin says so, or or Thor. This, you don't have to incorporate that. You incorporate what the essence of that God represents, and they get it, and it's all in every religion. I mean, it's already in every religion. The same kind of things can be talked about in human problems. So it relates.
It's all different paths to the same top of the mountain, I think.
Yeah. And the correlations were, you mentioned correlations before I forget. I really wanted that in the book. And mainly because I don't do tarot and I don't know anything about tarot. So I had to research that. I had to research what these tarot cards were. And then there's other books that do have some. And I was like, I want that in my book. But I really wanted to get, the correlations for that in there because a lot of my people that I read use tarot. And they do have similar correspondences. Crystals and herbs. I do a lot of herbal work. I do a lot of crystal work. I taught people all they needed to know about all the rocks. That was probably my main job at that place, and learning all about the crystals. And I found that even crystals, I mean, you're taking like a blue apatite, and that's all about communication. I kept thinking, holy moly, this is on Zeus. This is like and Zeus is blue apatite. So it was fun to make those correlations actually.
Now, speaking of stones, you said that you use runes, wooden runes.
Mhm.
Do you think that there's a preferred stone or grouping of stones? Because a lot of the metaphysical shops, I'm here in Salem, Massachusetts, so they're on every street corner.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of the runes I see are on stones slash
Mhm.
crystals. Is there one that's better than the other, or hodgepodging it together and have one rune of this crystal, one rune of this crystal? Any insight on that?
I get that question a lot actually. And since a lot of the runes that we sold there at that store were those stone runes, I had to answer that. And I brought others in because I don't prefer those stone runes. They're too round. They don't cast well. They do not, you can't do a layout with them for divination because you need to have a uniform shape. So you don't know what the rune is, if it's forward or reversed on the back, similar to tarot. And I found that it was just, and sometimes they're just poorly made. A lot of times the runes are just, they're making hundreds of these. And that's why I can understand why people don't necessarily want to buy runes that were just made by, I don't know, children in China. I don't know. But I'm like, that's so what I prefer is to find it depends on what you want to do with it. I have several different sets of all different makes, metal ones, clay ones, stone ones, wood ones. But you can choose them based off of what you want to do with them. So some runes will be easier to use if they are flat. So even if they're stone, if they're flat, you'll be able to cast those pretty well. They'll lay one way or the other. You'll be able to definitely tell. Other runes will have a more uniform shape, especially the wood ones, so that you can do layouts with them. So these are the ones I made. I made some Fimo ones, but I shaped them all in a rectangular way so that I couldn't tell what the rune was on the back. So that's a thing. And say round runes, you make them out of a log or a tree branch or something. Well, those, if you try and cast, will roll right off the table. And I've had that happen. So I look at that. What I do tell people is that you can pick stone runes, and what they're great for is carrying them with you, taking them with you. Each of those crystals, you just look at what are you looking for to do, I guess. So if you're looking for some healing energies, and maybe you'll buy a multi set of runes that have different things, or you get one that's urus that is a quartz crystal, or maybe you're looking to have a little more self-love. So you're going to get that Lagus, Freya's rune, and you'll get that in rose quartz. And so that's how you can use a combination of the rune meanings with a stone and make it practical.
Gotcha.
Because it's just when you start doing castings. Yeah. And the other thing is too, you can always just reach in and pull out your rune cast. You don't have to read reverse runes. You just pull them out as long as you're aware of you'll know if one should have been reversed or whatever. But yeah.
And it looked like you had a rune set that almost looked like a card.
Oh yeah, I knew you were going to ask about that. Yes.
It was like the tarot card of runes.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad you recognize that. I made these runes. I made them. I have a wood cutter etcher kind of machine, Glowforge, and I experimented with making runes with that. So I drew them out, just used a Sharpie, and I drew out runes on a piece of paper, and I etched them. And they were small. They were the normal size, and they were great. They were fantastic. I drew one of the runes backwards on accident, but that happens.
It
So I
happened.
stopped using those runes and corrected it and made more. But over COVID, I was doing a lot more video rune readings. So, and I'm old. I'm not tech savvy. So I'm using one camera to zoom in while I've got another one here. But it was hard for my clients to see and really, see the runes and to make an impression on them. And I thought, I got to do something about that. Plus, I realized that nobody I'm reading has ever had a rune reading before. Now, if they've only had tarot readings before, why don't I make something that makes them feel a little bit more comfortable when they sit down in the chair, especially if they're doing a divination method that they've never tried before? So I made some larger runes, and this way I can see them. That's mainly the reason why I'm a little selfish on
But
that.
we can see them when you're doing video readings.
Exactly. So even, and they're nice and large. You don't have to even put them right up to the camera and mess up that. They can stay this far away and you can still clearly read each rune. And when you're at the table, you can actually shuffle them almost like cards. I feel it makes people a little more comfortable and it makes them, they just kind of get it. And then you can lay them out and you turn them over like a book and you'll get your
And it brings
forward
a
and reverse.
familiarity to it.
Right. And so far, it's been great. And I use these runes pretty much exclusively for reading for others. For that reason, I have a little lazy Susan actually that I put my rune cloth on so that I can turn it so the client can see the layout via their view. I usually have them take a picture of it so that we can go back over that when they come back in for another rune reading. Let's compare. I like to experiment with that kind of thing, the other runes. And the thing is, when you make them yourself, even if you're gifting them or selling them, it takes a long time to make runes. The set that I just pulled out, that was the Fimo set. Now think about, there's 24 runes. So I had to make each rune, pinch each rune into the shape. I had to then draw on each rune. Then you have to bake it. I mean, so this is in 24, a run of 24, then another run of 24. Then you bake it, then you take it out. Then you have to paint it. That's a task. And then you have to paint the rune itself. That's 24 more of that. And you might have to do 2 coats and then 3 coats of fingernail polish on each rune.
Wow.
So these have a lot of energy in them. So,
Not a simple
I don't usually
process.
use these for other people. I'm just like, no, I put too much work in them. They feel really good. I'm going to keep them that way. So yeah, there's a lot of intention you can put into your runes, no matter how you're making them.
I think that's what actually I think does make them most versatile is you can do a lot with them that you can't necessarily do with tarot.
Right.
Yeah, I love that you brought up that the ones made out of crystals, the ones that might be irregularly shaped, that those have a use as something that you carry with you, maybe in a talisman bag or just in your pocket to bring that energy, into your life. Maybe you're going into a new job and you want to bring some energy in with you. You can pick a rune to help you with that. Like you said, with a corresponding crystal that might also have that same kind of go get 'em energy. But at the same time, you have so many other different ways to do runes. You have the flat ones so that you can cast them. You have created cards, rune cards, so that you can do almost a tarot reading with them. And I think that just makes them very accessible to people. They're just a little bit easier to grab. And for the runes, it seems simpler to start, and then it opens up into so much more. So it just seems to be a little more accessible, I think, for people to start with a rune. So I'm surprised that they're not as familiar for people as tarot cards because they do feel more accessible.
Yeah.
But your book has been also very accessible. I loved how fun it was to read, how accessible you made every single rune, the history, what it was, how to use it. Do you have like a simple reading or a simple way that someone can incorporate runes into like their daily life?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you on that, by the way. It was fun to write. I'd already been writing for like a year on a book, just not knowing what I was going to do with it. So when I got the call to do this book, I was like, I have this already. And it allowed me to really refine it and weed it down. And that was, that was so rewarding. But yeah, if you're not writing a rune book, the way that I tell people to get started, in fact, I'm doing a clinic on this here soon, is about getting started in runes. I would just do a rune a day, a rune pull a day. You reach in. And what I'm actually going to be publishing, I'm trying to get it made now. I'm doing a journal, a little rune 30-day rune journal. They're out there. I wanted to do one of my own, and it will be one of those things. And you can just do this without that. But that's the easiest way to get into runes, is to do a 30-day rune pull. You pull one rune every day, and then you write down in your notebook, or you ask first before you pull it. You go, what rune should I learn about today? And then you pull it. Read up on the rune. Bullet point what it means. Then carry it with you every day, or carry it with you all day. And you're going to start to see it. You'll start to see this pattern in the trees. You'll start to see it in the painting on the parking lot. You'll start to experience it, and you'll look for it. So to me, when you do that, that's how you get to learn it. And you get to sit down, and then you meditate with it. You just draw it with your finger, and then you get to experience it. And that's just one rune per day. And if you pull the same rune the next day, that means you need to experience it again. And you do it, and you do it for 30 days. That's my easiest way. Or, I tend to tell people not to try and do a reading on themselves all the time. They're there to guide you, but they really aren't going to give you the exact answers you want. I mean, let's look at Norse gods, man. Those guys, it's awful. I mean, they're all awful.
Yeah. I mean, no straight answers there.
No, they're going to give you those answers. They're going to give you that guidance. And also maybe no guidance at all. Maybe you are experiencing that rune all day. Your gifu, that give and take, that compassion, that acceptance, that love, that generosity. And you focus on that rune, and you're going to do that all day. You get Hagal, which means hail. You're like, I don't want to focus on this rune today. But what you do is you use it as a shield. Bring on all those challenges that were going to come anyways, whether I pulled this rune or not. But now you're aware of them, and why you're aware of them. Hagal means you're going to get through those challenges, and you're going to learn something very important from them. And what do you need to learn from them? So they're not that big of a challenge anymore, because you're using Hagal's energy to do that. And that's the best way to get to know them and do it on a daily basis. Or you have a dinner and you want to carve runes into your turkey, or carve them into your bread before you bake it. Anything like that you can do on a daily basis. You don't have to do rune readings for people to incorporate a spiritual aspect of runes in your daily life, for sure. And as far as the heathen stuff goes too, I will be out there and tell everybody that I don't really do any of, I've been asked this too. I don't do kindreds. I don't do any asatru. I don't do religion. I just don't do religion in general. And I don't consider Buddhism and or Norse runes to be a religion in that way. Although I'm, do you. Definitely
right.
Do you.
No, and I love that you pointed that out. The runes themselves are definitely not a religion, and they're certainly not held by any one particular religion. They're kind of more for everybody else, like you said, and something that can be used. We've touched on sigils before. I liked how you said to put them on yourself. And one thing that we have told, if you wear makeup, if you wear perfume or anything like that, you can draw it in your concealer before you put your makeup on. You can draw it as you're putting on your perfume.
In your perfume.
Your oils. Yeah, draw that.
Yeah, do that with oil. I never thought about that. Yes. Yeah. You got your deodorant. You're just doing a little Anzus here, a little T-walls. Get some massive coverage on a little.
Whatever it takes, right?
I don't know if there's a rune for smells, but boy,
there probably should be.
But that is exactly it. You get to utilize runes like that because they are, and to me, that is a sacred way of using them.
Yes.
I mean, that's every time you put some intention into that, it's a sacred way of using it.
Now, to kind of just circle back to the book real quick, one thing that I thought was interesting is you can it's not just informative, but it can kind of be used as a workbook. Can you kind of touch on that aspect of the workbook piece of the book and how people can use that to learn how to do runes, divination, do rune pulls? I love books that are kind of half info, half workbooky. I feel like I'm a participating player at that point.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you. I use them all of the rune books I own, and I own several, but I use them as reference books. And I tell people in the book, I want you to highlight in here. I want you to underline paragraphs. I want you to do whatever it is, write in the margins. I want this book to be like a textbook in high school. Utilize it, write it up. This isn't a sacred tome you have to read cover to cover. In fact, you shouldn't. You should go through and do the things, take a good glance at it. I put a bunch of I really wanted to add some things in the back that were spells. And full disclosure on this, that the company that had me write this book originally wanted me to rewrite another rune person's book. And they were going to discontinue it, I think, and they just wanted to expand it. And I thought, oh, okay, but then this person also follows me on Instagram. And I'm like, I know this. I have this book. And I was like, oh, wow. Completely different author, female, much younger. And the writing just would not match up. I was like, I don't want to put my name on this expansion when it was this person's work. When they did that, I want to do my own, thing. So that book had a kind of a spell for each rune in the back of it, and it had, or at least a few runes it did. And I did one for every rune in the Futhark. And not even a spell. I guess they are spells. Yes, they're spells. I mean, how to make like Suilo tea. Suilo is the sun, and that's what she had in her book too. So I did a riff off of that. And then I came up with a bunch of my own based off of my experience. I thought this is great. And everybody can do this too. You can come up with your own spells for each rune. What would I do for Tiwaz? Tier. I'm also a big Tick fan. And I was reading, and he's like, smells like justice. And I'm like, that's it. Tier. He's a god of justice and legalities. And so I did a thing. I don't even know what I did. I'd have to look it back up. But that one was one based off of, it was a way to make something. It's a recipe. It's a court case type of powder, I believe. Yeah, it is a victory powder. So this is something that I did myself as well for some of my family members. And you can use this in a candle ritual. So you can dress your candle with this, and each of the ingredients has something to do with protection and successful outcome on legalities. So each rune has a way that you can do multiple things with Tiwaz too, different types of spells. But I just wanted to inspire people on how to use that and then go. And I tell my book too, this should be one of many rune books in your collection. Don't just make this your rune book or any of them. When you read, sometimes you want to reference. I mean, you do your own rune cast and you want to reference something. You just go and like, let the spirit kind of guide you which book you need to read. And I would do that too. Pull out this book. All right. Before I had my own book, but but I still do that. You pull it out, you go right to the page, you relax your eyes, and you just look at the page. And whatever you happen to be looking at is what they want you to know. Doesn't matter.
And I think what I love most is the correspondent section for each rune, and how every chapter has like a takeaway.
Oh, so you like the takeaways?
I love the takeaway section. That is my jam. I'm like, this guy is writing this book for me.
Oh, good. I knew there was a reason. I didn't know what to think of that. I was like, why am I writing takeaways? I'm just repeating what I said. This is hard. This is like a history.
Thumbs up on the takeaways. Nope. Thumbs up on the takeaways.
Okay. I will keep that in mind for other books.
Yes, my husband also very much likes the takeaways because not a huge reader, and that really helped, make those points make a lot more sense to him. And so I love them as well.
I suppose you can, if you even underlined the takeaway part that you really wanted to know, then you would immediately reference that first, and you can go back and look at where it's at in the book. Yeah, I can see how that works. Great. Well, thank you. That's great.
Actually, one of those takeaways struck me like lightning. Actually, I was reading through, and I believe it was definitely the rune Uruz, and in it you had compared it to the tarot card, the High Priestess, and I immediately just felt shock because the High Priestess's crown, her headdress on most Rider-Waite tarot decks, if you look at the horns, it's Uruz upside down.
Oh,
I couldn't believe it. That was the first thing that
you got the guy looking up a tarot deck card now.
I know. Yeah, I know. No, I was like looking up Uruz. I'm like, when you were saying that, I was like, wait a minute, I'm picturing that, and you're right. It's because kind of off kilter. One part of Uruz is this way, but then there's the angle.
Yeah, and it looks very, very similar. And I had never really caught that before, but you kind of opened my eyes to that correlation. And I I think that's kind of like what you were saying about grabbing a different book each time when you do a reading or when you want to kind of look at the rune meanings, because you never know when someone is going to have a different take that you hadn't thought of before or open your eyes to a different way to kind of look at the runes. And so I love, like you said, having lots of different books and lots of different references. Learning is so important. And I think kind of
Yeah.
gathering from all those sources is very cool.
Well, it's also one of those things where if, as an author, I'm like, well, everybody, there's so many rune books out there. There's so many. And I was like, well, each person though got downloaded basically the information from source or spirit or whatever you want to believe. But each author then got to put it through their filter of humanity. So every single book has relevance, even the early ones that they didn't like that. Oh gosh, what's his
Right.
name? That
Ralph
there's a book that
Bloom.
Ralph Blum, yeah. Even there's some relevance in those, but yes,
That was my introduction to runes. I
really, yes.
apologize.
No, I have the set. I have a hardcover set of it. I was like fascinated with getting it. I'm like, ooh, these are the first ones, like
But
collector's edition.
back in the day, that was the only option for runes was that
Right.
Ralph Bloom set.
And I will say that I do use the weird rune. Now, that's been a source of controversy since Ralph Blum's books. Uh, some people do not use the blank rune. And I call it, and I've been yelled at on forums and stuff about it. I'm like,
I look at it as the tarot card, the fool, kind of the you don't know what you're going to get.
right. There's a way to read them to me, and people are like, it's not traditional. And I'm like, hey, there's no traditional rune reading at all. There's no evidence they ever did.
Right.
And B, well, it just offsets the balance. Perthro is supposed to mean that. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Perthro has way different meanings than a blank void. And if that's in the middle of a reading, what does that mean? It makes it hard because you have to think about it. Why is there a void here? Do they not want us to talk about this? Maybe that's just this topic that and usually comes up when it's like a very sensitive topic or something, or they're just like, or is it like, hey, we're not here to give you guidance on that. You have to navigate that. That's coming up. You have to navigate it, even if it's in the now. Like, yeah, there's a lot of unknowns happening to you, but here's the guidance you need to know. We're not going to tell you what those unknowns are happening, but we're going to tell you how to deal with them.
If I were getting a rune reading, I would want the blank rune to be in the mix.
Yeah. I find it a little exciting and it's always funny.
It's
I'm not
it's,
funny. I
it's
shouldn't say that. I've done that before. It comes up and we're having a good time with the client. We're we're just having a good time. And it comes up, I turn it over and go, oh my. And they're like, what? I'm like, oh, I'm
Sudden
sorry.
shift.
But yes. So now I got to think for a sec because it does give you a challenge as a reader to figure out what they're trying to say. But to me, the more options I can give my people, and I look at it this way too, their people are trying to give that person a message, the person they're guiding through life. How are they going to do that with some guy with a bunch of, wooden runes? And there's only 24 of them, mind you. And this person's got a lot of baggage and we got to fix this, but somehow we have to do this out of 9 runes that he's going to pull for her. So how do we, so it's like, you have to look at it from a guide's point of view as well. What would you say? How would you say it? And why is this here? Because this is a good way to say this. And the other thing would be talking with the client. Like I said, I'm not a psychic medium. I could read you without runes. I could read it. I'm a good reader of people. I could read I can read somebody right there and then, but
Kind of like you mentioned earlier, you were talking about not reading for yourself so much.
right.
For me, it's easier to read other people than it is to read people I know or myself, partly because I know myself and I know what I want to hear and don't want to
Mm.
hear. So it's harder to hear your guides because it's your own wants and needs. But when you're reading for someone you don't know, you don't have all that baggage. Like you said, the filter, it's much easier to let the runes speak or to let that energy speak through the runes when you're reading someone that you don't know.
I've found that is very true. But when you read for people, you may as well. I did a whole podcast on this. You may as well be looking in the mirror. I did a whole festival where I was reading one person after another for 2 days straight. And I swear I could have been reading to myself. A lot of times, if you need the work, if you need the self work, you'll get readings and you'll be doing readings for people.
The
And if you're
clients
really
who need the
open,
same work are coming to you.
yeah, that's why they're in front of you, because they have some same issues. Why would they come to somebody or be attracted to somebody that has a completely different outlook on life or completely has no idea or no clue as to what they're going through? Just a natural thing that people don't really realize. That's another responsibility of being a reader. They're going to sit down in front of you and you're going to be able to relate to them. You're going to read them. and you're going to be able to give them proper guidance because it's your higher self also talking to you. Every guidance you give somebody else, I learn from. I learn a little bit, and I can, and it's just like, yeah, it's hard for me to read myself or do a casting. I usually use the runes again, like you do, in a different way for sigils, or and then I do readings when it for myself, but mainly for my wife and I. We have our own family set, but and friends, yeah, that's a little bit hard. But I mean, repeat clients become friends, so you got to get used to that too, and being able to give them the advice, and you got to pull yourself out of the friendship relationship a little bit and let your guides kind of take over. Your spirit takes over and then tells them what they need to hear. But if you can do that with confidence, then I think that's showing growth, a lot of growth.
Now, one other thing that you have mentioned, and I heard you speak on it a little bit here, was when you talked about the runes, you almost talked about them a little bit like they had their own personalities, like they have their own attitudes a little bit. And I think you mentioned that a little in the book as well. And I 100% believe this because I had a tarot deck once and it just had a really shitty attitude. I got it. I worked with it, attuned with it, I thought, did readings with it, and it told me I was going to die. And then every time I did a reading with it, it was really bad news that wasn't true. And even when I would read for other people, it would be the worst doom and gloom, none of it true. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. And
It didn't like you.
the deck just we just didn't have a good fit. It was the Enchanted Tarot, I believe. I ended up giving it away. Chelle and I used to be part of a group that did different workshops and things. It spoke about tarot, and I ended up giving it away to someone there that it seemed to like. But I've never had before since such a personality reaction from a tarot deck. Now, is that similar to what you were saying?
This is why I don't read tarot.
Yeah, it's just the one
staring
deck.
at me while I'm sleeping. What is that deck on my nightstand? Jeez. No. No, that's true. Actually, it is. I mean, you naturally say you have multiple runes, multiple rune sets. You're gonna find ones that just feel good in the hand that you like to pick, and then so you're gonna give them a personality. You really give them the personality, kind of, but also you recognize it, and that's where people would come in and say, "Well, you said they weren't anything but just chips of wood and plastic and blah blah, and they're not." I'm like, well, yeah, but also, I have toys that have personalities, man.
Sure.
My cats have personalities. And it's all in the way you act when you have them. How does it make you feel? Like when, this personality, that the big ones, they just seem like they feel good to me. And I get really accurate readings and really good positivity when I do it for others with these large runes. Great. When I want to do my own casting, I use my smaller runes. Well, that one handcrafted set I did that took forever. Because those guys just want to, yeah, you do kind of give them a personality at that. Now, I don't know if I've ever had something that didn't read right with runes. I always felt like that was my problem. And
I
that's they're
usually
being
did
just
too.
rude by not by pointing out my issues. But
No, that was the only deck.
I've heard that story though a lot, actually.
Yeah.
That they're like, oh yeah, especially with tarot. I
Mm.
mean, I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's a different kind of energy or just, that's just how it works, but I don't know.
Now, is there anything you recommend to people when they're choosing? Like you mentioned a couple different things to look for, runes that are
Mhm.
flat, something that you might feel comfortable in your hand or that you like. Is there anything else that someone should look for when choosing a set for themselves for the first time?
I think I would just suggest not to be afraid to try them out. I mean, if you're the kind of person that is like, I'm going to pick a lucky rock today and it's going to be the first one I see because that's my lucky rock. If you're looking at a bunch of rune sets and you're just drawn to one, you're like, oh, I'm going to pick that one. That's fine. But the other things you can look for are just how does it feel in your hand? Try casting them, dropping them on a tablecloth or, a rug on the floor, however. How do they bounce? How do they feel in your hand? How do they make you feel? That's the biggest thing because you want to use them. You want them to feel, and maybe you'll feel energy if they're stones. A lot of people feel energy from stones, and you put those in there, and you're just like, oh, these are going to be powerful. And some of them you might get and be like, well, I like these, but I don't want to use these for other people, mainly because I do divination differently for other people than I do for myself. Now, you might think that. So that would be it. I don't think there's any hard and fast rule or any big suggestions I can give you because everybody is I would just encourage everybody pick the rune set based off of what feels good to you, not what anybody else says, not what I say or anybody else says.
For my own personal information, when are you starting production on deck of rune sets?
Oh, the rune set decks. Yes, there are a couple out there. In fact, wow, I have my
I
own.
love I love that you've turned them into cards. I just love that concept.
Oh, and it works. I mean, you can turn them. I would for classes, I would etch out on cardstock. I would etch out little runes, and so they're flat, and then I can give those in an envelope to people.
Oh,
And they're just little regular size runes, but instead of etching and cutting them on wood, I did it on cardstock. And it worked out really, or like this craft paper cardstock. If you don't have a set of runes, you don't have any money to make runes, do that. Just take a cardstock or whatever and draw out the runes. This is also going to take some intention, and you can cut them out and you can shuffle them and use them like that. Use them similar, to tarot. Doing a three card layout or do a 9 rune layout. I haven't had any production yet on the actual cards. I'm working on that because there are a few other sets. And then one set I bought actually had the same picture on the back, and you can tell if it was reversed, which I was like, boo. You can't do it that way. I can't cast it. I can't do the regular type of reading like it. So if you do make your own cards, make sure the back is
something different.
yeah,
Plain.
just or just so you can't see it. Yeah, it's the same. Either it's blank or it has the same a mirrored image, so you can't tell if it's forward or reverse, and that'll help out a little bit better. And don't be afraid to read the reversed type of rune either. Don't be afraid of those. But yeah, I'm gonna try and hopefully get that out in the journal, the 30-day workshop.
I love your 30-day. I'm a journal fiend, so anything
Oh,
with a journal on it, I love that. So that sounds
I have
fabulous.
I did a video on journaling your journey, and people would ask me about journaling, and I'm just like, man, you should have multiple journals. I have my journals over there, and they're like, I started them in 2020, I think. Where is it? Oh, they're over there.
Are
Yeah,
you
so I've got,
me? I mean, think you're me.
I don't know. Yeah,
You
maybe.
got lots of journals over there. I got like 6 different journals. I
Yeah.
have like, a magical journal. I have like my schedule journal. I have my moon journal. I have,
Hmm. I have a
feelings
journal
journal.
that I don't really show people. It's all
That's
hand
right.
drawn and hand dotted, and it's going to be my grimoire that my grandkids going to freak out about. But it's like this thick, so it's going to take me a long time to finish. I've got my daily journals, and then spiritual and magical journals. So I do one each year, even though one year I might only have filled it up that much. But then to me, having multiple journals is great, especially if you're doing rune readings or you're practicing those. Have a journal for your 30-day workshop that you're doing, and then have one for your when you read for other people when you're practicing. And you write down the way it laid out, and you can refer back to it. Yeah, I love journaling. It's I think it's super important, and you shouldn't ever get on yourself if you stop journaling for a while. I say that as a professional because I do that. So there, I'm giving myself permission.
Yes,
But
and giving
yeah,
everyone else permission too. I love it.
yes, you don't have to daily journal, and you're not a failure if you don't. So,
So, where can people find your podcast and your YouTube channel, and where can they get readings from you? Give us all your details.
well, if they cast some runes, maybe they're going to find out. Come up in the runes. No,
There you
uh,
go.
you can go. I've created Runeways, which is kind of the moniker for the business end of things here. Plus, I thought it was neat. But Runeways, because it kind of incorporates everything. So, runeways.com, you'll be able to find that. I've got some, that'll have a schedule up there where I'm doing readings and clinics. And I also have a resources page. So, if you want to find all the books that inspired me that I think you should have, it's got there. So, those are great books to start with. And yeah, it's got a lot of stuff on there. I do a podcast, the Runeways podcast. You'll find it on Spotify, and I think it's on all the other things too, Apple and whatnot. But I do that on Spotify, and I've got a new one coming out about client consultation and how to. We
Fantastic.
talked about a lot of it today.
Yeah.
So I got that, and you can find Runeways on Instagram as well. I don't have a TikTok. I have to do that for Dungeon Crate. So
That's
do
okay.
that for myself.
We don't have TikTok yet either.
Okay.
I just want to remind everybody that the new book that is out is called The Complete Guide to Runes, an essential reference for rune lore, meanings, divination, and magic. I think it's awesome. I loved it. Easy to read. Love everything about it. And it actually made me interested in runes again.
Oh, wonderful. That really makes me feel good. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne, for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it. We will make sure to put all of your links in the show notes so people can find you easily and also find your fabulous book that I also adored. It was fun to read, full of information, and it's definitely going to have a place on my shelf to pull out when I need to reference some runes in the future. So
Wonderful.
Thank you very much. And hopefully we can have you back when you have your 30-day workbook out, because we all love a good journal.
If each of you want a rune reading, I'd be happy to do that as well sometime. We can do a video reading and
that'd be
do
so
one
cool.
for each of you, and that's on me. And that way I can kind of show you how it works too.
Well, we are going to take you 100% up on that.
Absolutely.
Oh, excellent. All right, good.
We would love to do that.
I've never had a rune reading.
I think you're going to love it.
I have. I'm actually I'm going to dedicate this episode actually to a friend of Chelle's and mine. His name was Zach, and he's the first person who ever did a rune reading for me. And he also is someone who was my GM for a long time. And he unfortunately passed a few years ago of a heart attack. And he would have absolutely loved you and loved your books. And he was very much a rune weaver in many, many ways.
Oh.
So hail the traveler, Zach. And so thank you again for joining us, Wayne.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Back on the Broomstick. If you could like, star us, subscribe, share, comment, friend us on Instagram, or shoot us an email at backonthebroomstick@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Keep it witchy.